Joining me today on the Rubin Report is human rights activist and Bangladeshi blogger Arif Rahman. Arif, welcome to the show.
Hi, Dave. It's really good to be here.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you. We've literally been going back and forth for about 5 months. We were introduced by our friend Faisal Saeed Al-Mutar, and we were trying to work out getting you on the show, and then there's obviously been some really horrific acts, unfortunately, in Bangladesh over the last couple of days, so we wanted to make this happen right now. I hate to start off, we're starting off depressing, but I guess that's sort of the nature of what you do, right?
Unfortunately, it is, yeah. I'm really glad that we're finally talking, and we should start saying thanks to Faisal for making it happen. He's a really great guy.
He is a great guy, and he's doing great work, and he's spreading the message of secularism and tolerance and atheism, all the things that you care about and write about and the things that I talk about. So, all right, before we get into the events of the last couple days, let's just talk about your history first, because you were sort of one of the first Bangladeshi bloggers, but give me a little bit about your history growing up to now you're in the UK and everything else.
Sure, thanks for that. I grew up in Bangladesh. It's actually it used to be part of Indian subcontinent back in 1947. But in 1947, it was part of Indian subcontinent. Then the British split it between India and Pakistan, and Bangladesh was East Pakistan, still part of Pakistan. And from 71, we split up because of we had a war. And since then, Bangladesh is an independent country. I grew up in the 80s in Bangladesh and 90s. And after 2003, I moved to UK. So that's kind of my history.
Right. So the history of Bangladesh, you know, I had Tariq Fatah on the show about 2 months ago, and we went very deep into the history of India and how it relates to Pakistan and the partition in 1947. But people don't even realize that Bangladesh was also formed as a country right at that time. I think a lot of people don't even realize. They hear Bangladesh or they hear about Bangladeshi bloggers. I don't even think that a certain amount of people realize that Bangladesh is a sovereign country.
Bangladesh is a sovereign country. It has been for the last 45 years. Because it was part of Indian subcontinent, I think, and Bangladesh itself is not that great in kind of communicating its history to the rest of the world. And there are other issues surrounding. I think we'll get to that at some point today. But we are a sovereign nation. We are a small geographic landmass, but population-wise, we're really huge. 170 million people in that very short space. It's mind-blowing. It's really, really highly populated.
Right. So when India was partitioned and then 3 countries appeared out of that, the British left and then it was split up, what is the difference between the average person that lives in Bangladesh versus the average person that lives in India versus the average person that lives in Pakistan? Because at one time they were all part of the same nation.
I think we just fall into the trap of not knowing much about Bangladesh. So when British left, so Indian subcontinent was a colony of the the British monarchy for 200 years. When the British decided to leave, there was a deliberation on how they should leave. There was a request by the Muslims to form their own kind of country. And Indian subcontinent was divided between India and Pakistan. So at the beginning, from 1947, it was only 2 countries, that is India and Pakistan.
Right.
Pakistan was a predominantly Muslim country. India actually formed as a secular state, not a Hindu country, although majority of the people at that time was Hindu background and Hindu religion. But after 1947, the East and West Pakistan was actually, I don't know if you can show the map, which is quite interesting. India was in between, Bangladesh was on the east, and Pakistan was on the west of India. There was almost 1,200 miles of geographic gap between the 2 parts of Pakistan, which was unrealistic, and it was completely based it was erected based on religion actually. So Pakistan, West and East combined, was formed based solely on Islamic brotherhood of some kind.
Right.
And in 1971, we had a war. But the question, get to your question, predominantly Pakistani and people are aware kind of Islamic Republic of Pakistan. India was a secular state. It was just a Republic of India, I think.
Yeah. The reason I ask you that is because I know we could spend the whole hour talking about the history of this region, of course, but I think it sets up a little bit of the rest of the things that we're going to talk about. So you grew up in Bangladesh. What was it like? Like, what was the government like? When did you sort of have your awakening about free thinking and atheism, that kind of stuff?
I grew up in the 80s, and during that decade, Bangladesh was actually ruled by a military dictator. And this guy was, we can't say directly, but he's a CIA implant essentially. During that time, because of the history of Bangladesh itself, at the very beginning, Bangladesh had because the Soviet Union was still quite powerful, although it was declining. Bangladesh was powered by Indian, support. Bangladesh was going towards like a socialist kind of state, and the state, the president was killed in a coup along with his whole family, and then Bangladesh was fallen into the dictatorship. So we suspect that the whole thing was orchestrated by CIA to kill the leader and then implant dictators. So when I grew up, Bangladesh was still having its social and cultural identities. So when I grew up, I feel I was kind of lucky because that was a very good time before the decline started to happen. And when I say the decline, since the 90s, the dictatorship fell and the so-called democratic parties came into power, coincided with the fall of Soviet Union. And those democratic parties, although democratic in their name, but we saw a very worrying rise of Islamism in the country throughout the whole of the 90s.
Yeah, wait, let's pause there for a second, because I think that's really fascinating. What you're saying is there was a military dictatorship, possibly had something to do with the CIA, and that was throughout the 80s. And then when that fell, the country the idea was that the country became more democratic, but then that ultimately led to the rise of Islamism, which is really where Bangladesh is now. I mean, that's really incredible because it seems like the reverse of how things are supposed to be.
It's actually a result of what the dictators were doing. A dictatorship was gradually bringing in more and more Islamic in a context into the culture and into the core of our state. They were introducing Islam as the state religion in the constitution, because our original constitution of the 1972, just after we got our liberation, did not have anything to do with Islam. It in fact prevented any party, any political activities based on religion. And once the founding father of the country, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, was killed along with his family, these dictators actually clarified the path for the Islamists to return to the country, who was originally driven out by the Liberation War heroes. And they started gradually to take hold of all the state institutions. And when the actual democratization happened in 1991, all the state machinery has so far already become very kind of into Islamization, and the trajectory was towards Islamization.
Right, and that sort of leads us to where we are now. Can you give me an example of like what was the type of thing that happened? Like I understand the idea of Islamism was taking over, but what types of freedoms were actually taken away that you or your family enjoyed in the 80s? That as this was happening, was it just things that you couldn't say? Did television channels change? The news change? Like what were some like specific examples?
The actual friction started when we were seeing signs of problems For example, within the society, we just to step back a little bit, just to give you a context, Bangladesh has a huge population. I told you earlier. One of the things that Bangladeshis do as a kind of a nation is they leave the country whenever they get a chance. This has been a thing for the last 45 years. And it's mostly, there are two strands of people actually. One strand of people who are kind of free thinking and who wants to live a better life. And in Bangladesh, it's not possible because of the religious kind of atmosphere was getting toxic and they were feeling suffocated. The other type was the laborers. For example, the whole of the Middle East, whole of the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, the imported labor is actually mostly majorities from Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, but Bangladeshis are the major portion. And the reason I say all these things is because the environment within Bangladesh wasn't good for meritorious people or good people to remain and actually help the country to become a better country. So when this happened, people were leaving obviously, but the actual friction started when we saw that our history of the liberation war itself was a war with Pakistan. It's a 9-month-long bloody war that Pakistan, actually West Pakistan at that time, started. They flew in 90,000 armed forces and started slaughtering Bangladeshi people in March 26th. In one night, they suddenly started killing us, and then we had to kind of declare our independence the following day, and then we had to go to war for 9 months with Pakistan, and eventually, with help from India, we won. The whole history has got Islamism ingrained with it, because Pakistanis did not like us. Although we were part of Pakistan, before the war, there was a lot of extortion of Bangladeshi people, and also the earnings that East Pakistan or Bangladesh was doing, the money was going to Pakistan. That means there was a huge economic imbalance and a lot of grievances.
Yeah.
The most grievance from the Pakistanis was that we were not Muslim enough, because we liked our culture, because we liked our music, our cultural activism, our other cultural activism. That's why Bengalis are more towards kind of a rounded human, rather than the extremist Pakistanis that you see today.
Yeah, I'm so fascinated by this stuff because, as I discussed with Tarek, he described the partition of India and everything that's happened subsequently as just a wound that hasn't healed. So it sounds very familiar, it sounds very similar to what you're saying, that because of these things that happened in 1947, 1971, then into the 80s and the transition into the 90s, that people are still trying to heal all this stuff that's just not being healed. But I know we can keep going on the history forever. But let's move to the current day, because people do hear a little bit about what's been going on with the Bangladeshi bloggers, but in the last couple of days, some really horrific stuff has happened, including this LGBT writer that was hacked to death. So can you just break down just what's happened in the last few days?
So if I just give you a bit of a context, in Bangladesh, legally being gay is not permissible. So if you're found engaged in any kind of homosexual activity, the police will take it upon themselves to arrest you and then prosecute you, because being a gay and a homosexual activity is illegal in Bangladesh. However, there are lots of gays in Bangladesh, as in any demography, and also being a very highly populated country, there are lots of queer people who definitely, for security reasons, has to stay in the closet. However, it's very suffocating for them. And because of a lot of activism happening inside Bangladesh, the queer and gay rights movement was gradually trying to make their voices heard, and they're trying to create a space. This gentleman, Zulhaz Mannan, he was a young guy, gay himself. He was a U.S. aide staff, and he was commended by the American ambassador because he also worked in the American embassy, and he brought out the first issue of gay magazine called Rubin. So that means there was really nice work being done by these guys, and although they were afraid, but they were trying to kind of show the rest of the population that we are as normal human being as everyone else, and we have the right as human being to live a normal life like anyone else, despite what the religious rights wanted to say.
Yeah, literally putting his life on the line to get his freedom expressed. Yeah.
Absolutely. So in few weeks earlier, 14th of April for Bangladeshi culture is really important because on that day we have it's a Bengali New Year. It's not the year, for example, you have Arabic year, you have Chinese year, you have the Gregorian calendar that is the kind of the world norm. But Bengalis, before all this happened for hundreds of years, we used to have our own calendar. So 14th of April is the first day of the new year, and we call it Nobo Borsho. On that day, throughout the country, it's a universal celebration that happens, and there's a huge rally happens in the capital near the university. And Bengali gays have been bringing out processions on the same day, celebrating color and life for the last few years. This year, when they tried to bring out their procession, they were scattered, scrambled, and then few of them were arrested. This guy actually went to the police and tried to take them, bail them out, and he was successful. However, we saw that things were not going well. And 2 days ago, we heard the horrific news that he himself and one of his friend was literally slaughtered in his own apartment by 2 or 3 unknown assassins who kind of walked in, slaughtered them, walked out, no mask, nothing. Literally, like nobody tried to stop them. Today, in the media, we can see CCTV footage of those people's clear faces, but we know nothing will happen about them.
Yeah, okay, so this is directly related to everything that you've done because, as I said at the top, you were one of the first people blogging and one of the first people talking about these things, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're on a list. Isn't there a list of something like 1,200 bloggers that Al-Qaeda has that these people are supposed to be killed? You're on that list, right?
Well, I don't know the global list about the 1,200 people you mentioned. I heard about it, but the infamous 84 blogger list that came out in 2013, that was actually the list that everybody knows about the Bangladeshi bloggers, consists of only Bangladeshi bloggers, and I'm at the very top at the moment. This list is actually, although somehow Al-Qaeda's name was added to it, but it was a joint venture between the government and all the extremist Islamists within the Bangladeshi country.
Wow.
Bangladesh government in 2013 actually sent out government circulars inviting evidence against atheists like me, and they said on this day we are going to have an open house. Anybody with evidence, please come and join the round table, and we're going to discuss and see what we can do. Following that meeting, the list was leaked to the media, and since then that list has become the list per se, and we have already lost a lot of friends from that list.
Right. I mean, we hear about the bloggers. I feel like every few months you just randomly hear a story. Unfortunately, they don't really percolate up to the mainstream, but I'll hear about it on Twitter or something like that. So when did you realize that you needed to start writing about this stuff, and how did you decide that you were going to put your own personal safety? I mean, I know you're in the UK now, but it's not fun hearing that you're on these lists, and many of my guests live with certain security issues and things like that.
If you remember, I was talking about the history of our liberation war that happened and the problem with Islamism, because Pakistani military flown in people in the country, but they were actually cut off from the rest of the Pakistani mainland. But they were able to slaughter 3 million of our people in 9 months' time because they had help from local Bangladeshi Islamists. And they were using as Muslim Brotherhood to help the Pakistani army. And if we fast forward today, and for example, last 10 years of my blogging history, Islamists in Bangladesh right now, they are trying to erase that history of our bravery. We fought against the Pakistanis, and they were saying all the nasty things against it. And that's when we started voicing our opinion about what they're trying to say. But then we tried to take it to next level, and we started criticizing what Islam itself was doing to the country. And that's when the problem started, because all the Islamist propaganda machinery within the country are kind of connected to the rest of the world, and they saw we are saying things that not many countries have said at that time. I'm talking about back in 2006-7 when we actually started blogging. And in Bengali, because we have a very rich cultural heritage, very rich literary base, and based on those, we said Islam does not work for us. So we started, finding issues with Islam back in those days. The things that you guys, for example, know now, we were talking about that back in Bangla language in our country, in our blog sphere. But we were kind of assured that if we stay behind the anonymity of internet, we're not going to be physically harmed. Although the Islamists themselves were threatening us, saying, it's very well and fine talking about these things on the web, but if we come and meet us on the street. But I said, you guys are not civilized. You can't have a discussion, civil discussion. The second you heard about Muhammad or anything problematic about him, you're gonna start shouting and take out your knife and you're gonna slaughter us. So how can you invite us to discuss? They said, we're not asking you to come to discuss. We're coming to show you or challenge you that you don't have the guts to actually say these things in front of us. I said, yeah, we are afraid of our lives.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So I actually, interestingly, I moved here back in 2003 in the UK, and I actually started blogging in 2006. So it's difficult for a lot of people to comprehend that if you're not in Bangladesh, how can you be a blogger, and then how can you be in problem? The reason I say this, it all was made possible because of the internet. Internet does not have any geographic boundary.
Yeah.
And what I can write in Bengali, luckily I can write in my own language. I could write from here, I could write from anywhere in the world, and I could actually address or talk to my colleagues and peers in Bangladesh. So that was happening, and because I was not worried about that much about my safety at that time, I had a free mind. That means I could say things that was taking the discussion to the next level, and that was one of the key things that I contributed to the discussion, that I had exposure to the rest of the world, to humanity, humanism, and secularism, and I was kind of absorbing those and then transferring those in Bengali language and to my current generation of my colleagues. But when all this listing thing happened, I received threats, and I can just show you quickly. In 2013, when all this list happened, these sort of leaflets were being spread outside mosques. I'll send you a copy later on.
Yeah.
These lists were being circulated outside UK mosques. The funny thing is, these lists the leaflets don't talk about killing anybody. All they say is these people has blasphemed, and these are the things that these guys have said. However, because they were spreading those outside the mosque, inside the mosque, the religious leader was generally saying what should be done to somebody who defames Muhammad. So you can imagine people coming out and receiving those leaflets, they were making those connections in their head one-to-one and what needs to be done. And that's how they create threat.
Right. So wait, I want to just make sure we don't gloss over that. You're talking about mosques in the UK now. You're not talking about Bangladesh. So you're saying so inside the imams are preaching about what you should do to these non-believers and infidels and atheists and all sorts of secular people. And then literally outside, they've got these guys that I assume are connected to the Muslim Brotherhood somehow.
Absolutely, yeah.
Handing out these things, and now the names are on there. So they're not saying go kill them, but you just heard something on the inside, and here's the list of people that are doing this stuff. I mean, this is in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, and the same methodology is used throughout the world by the Islamists, and they're very smart. Don't get me wrong; these guys are really smart. They know how to work under the radar, but still achieve in creating fear in people's mind, and that's what they're doing again in Bangladesh right now.
So when you see that list, and as a citizen of the UK, that's basically a death threat to you, even if it's not 100% directly there, but it's a death threat to you and people like you. What do? Is there any recourse you can take? Did you call the authorities? I mean, what can be done?
Well, this is not virtual threat. They directly, literally threatened. This is a leaflet. This is a circular from Ansarullah Bangla team. So this is the Al Qaeda offshore of Indian subcontinent. They call them AQIS, Al Qaeda in Indian subcontinent, and they literally have said, if you are found to be defaming the Prophet and few other things about Sharia and everything, rest assured we will get to you at some point. So those are direct threats. So I went to the counterterrorism British police, and it took them like 2 years to get back to me. But eventually in 2015, they came to me and said, yes, we have intelligence report about you. So we're going to make sure that you are safe. So if you go somewhere, let us know. We'll try to make sure that you are safe. But I tried to do that. But then again, on my Facebook page, the banner of my Facebook page says, not afraid. Because if I am afraid about some criminals, then I can't really live my life.
Yeah.
If they hit me, that's a criminal act. They don't have any legal jurisdiction or anything to do it. So I don't worry too much. I obviously try to save, but I don't stop doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, so some of this goes to something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, that, I've tried to go out of my way on this show repeatedly to separate the religious doctrine of Islam, right, the ideas of a religion, versus the people, because people believe in all sorts of things. Some people believe in things literally, some people are just nominal, don't believe in anything really, whatever, and everything in between, from radical jihadists to people that are complete non-believers, whatever, atheist Muslims that exist, right? But what you're talking about really is Islamism, which is the political part of this, because this is political, right? If someone's handing out a flyer saying these people, we don't want them expressing their freedom of speech, we don't want them expressing these ideas, that's really political. Is that where we have to sort of go with this conversation now? Because it's a little bit easier to critique a political idea than versus when we talk about the religion and everyone starts freaking out.
Islam is not only a religion, it's a political religion. From the very beginning, Muhammad, his campaigns were not religious only. It was political. If you look throughout his history, he did not contain the concept of God and what he asked us to do to personal life or anything. He says Islam is a complete code of life. That's what they do. It's completely different to, for example, Christianity, which already had a church state separation. And also Christianity I think historically never tried to kind of go into the state running business. But I think recently I've seen some evidence helping Ted Cruz saying that, you can't just leave your religion, you have to use the religion in everything, which is kind of the same thing that political Islam has done so far.
Right.
Yes, absolutely, Islam is a political religion.
So what do you do about that as someone that's in the UK and you're writing about these things and you're trying to explain to people the difference between religion and a political movement, but you're showing right now that these things are really conflated. How do you get people to understand that the political part is what we should be afraid of and not what someone privately believes in their own home, as long as they're not trying to push those beliefs on someone?
That's the thing. I mean, as an atheist, that's what we tried to say from the very beginning. However, we have seen a very weird, baffling phenomena. And I can see that it's not only happening in Bangladesh, it's happening everywhere. We used to get that all the time from certain political leftists. And they used to say, you can't say anything against Islam because it's Islamophobic and it hurts all the Muslims. And I said, we used to say that, yes, if criticizing the religion itself, some believer get hurt, it's their problem. we can't stop criticizing the problems because political Islam encroaches its boundary and comes to our secular lives and tries to impose its ideas on us. The leftists never listen to it, and they always say, you are victimizing Muslims. And no matter how many times or how many ways we say that we have nothing to do with an individual Muslim who has its own personal belief about Islam, or even if he can believe that he has those political, willings, as long as that person doesn't act on becoming an Islamist himself or kind of, act on a violent way, we have no problem with the person. We have the problem with an ideology. But the thing is, again, Islam, the way it embeds itself in somebody's mind, that person becomes the ambassador of Islamism. It's within the instructions, it's within the training of a Muslim that if you are a Muslim, it's your religious duty to actually, what's the word for it? It's your duty
to propagate this idea.
Not only propagate, but also to support and protect. I was looking for the word protect the religion from defamation and blasphemy. So if you see anybody, that's how they pass on the agency to individuals everywhere. And that is really, really toxic.